we can only accommodate 100 people on Zoom, so we have like 140 registrants. So anyway, I'm very happy to have Carl here, and because he's writing about this every day. And so, Carl, I want to start when we had a little rehearsal today, and you said you were a little pessimistic today. So what's making you pessimistic?
Well, I guess my pessimism in particular was focused on what's happening in the United States in terms of cases. People seem to be talking a lot about how somehow the first wave is over and we're going to be able to relax, and maybe there'll be a second wave later, but everything will be basically okay. And, you know, I don't really see us going into a trough anytime soon. I mean, basically, like things are getting more in control in the Northeast, like in New York State, but you know, we have plenty of other places where cases are going up, and so you know, I think we're in a bad situation, and I think we're going to stay bad, or may even get worse. You know, as people start to feel more relaxed because it's summer and just get stir crazy and start cutting corners and getting closer to people. You know, we could very easily see just this sort of plateau rising up again and getting to incredibly high levels. So yeah, so that's what's got me pessimistic. On the science side, I'm less pessimistic because there's so much work being done. But in terms of people taking this seriously, there's a lot of reason to be frustrated.
Okay. So as you know, last week they announced Gilead has a new drug out. But then I saw that they're donating 607,000 vials of remdesivir in the US during that time frame. That's enough to treat 78,000 hospitalized patients, which is not enough. And they were kind of disappointed about this. So first of all, do you think this drug is a breakthrough? I know it cuts down 4 days, maybe. It's kind of like reminds you of Tamiflu, makes you feel better for a day or two. But I guess, you know, the argument is that, you know, if you're in the hospital, 4 days of being out of the hospital is better. But do you think that? And do you think?
Yeah, I definitely think it. I definitely think it's a good thing, these results. I think breakthrough might be a little bit strong because it might make people think like, oh, well, if you get sick, you just take remdesivir and then you're all set. But I don't think that's the case. I mean, well, the data sort of sure shows that's not the case. And you know, the results show that there was a reduction in mortality from around 11.6% to 8%, and that wasn't even statistically significant. And you know, you know, if you're, you know, who wouldn't want to get out of the hospital in a few days sooner? So that's good too. It's certainly an important moment because it's the first drug to be shown in a, you know, a clinical trial. It was randomized, and that had an effect. So, you know, we just need to hope that that more drugs do an even better job.
So what drugs are in the pipeline that you know about or are hopeful about?
Well, you know, there are drugs that are sort of coming in from different angles. So there are, you know, there's actually some drugs that are, they are not going after the virus, but after the immune system, for example. You know, people are dying largely because their immune systems are overreacting. And so if you can find a way to sort of rein in the immune system without, obviously, while still letting it fight the virus, then you can actually like help people out theoretically. And there are clinical trials underway now, and there's some small ones that had some promising results. So that's one area where I think we should keep our eye on. And there could be a bunch of drugs used for other things, any, you know, allergy drugs or cancer drugs or drugs for schizophrenia that turn out to be very good against this coronavirus just by coincidence, because they go after the same targets in the cell. So, you know, I'm not going to like say like, oh, this is the one in particular to keep your eye on. What's good is that there are a whole lot of them. There are too many to keep your eye on, and that's one area where I feel a little more optimistic.
Okay. What about, are you optimistic about vaccines?
Well, I think there's reason to be optimistic about vaccines, but you also have to like remember how vaccine research goes. Usually vaccines take 10, 20 years. And, you know, we don't want it to take 10 or 20 years. We want vaccines as soon as possible. And so there are a number of groups who are hoping to have certainly the very first batch of vaccines by January or so. If they can pull it off, that'll be an amazing event. But you know, they're going by the sort of standard playbook that that has worked on a lot of other diseases in the past. So, and it doesn't look like this virus is especially complicated just from a vaccine point of view. So, yeah, so I am optimistic, although by being optimistic, I don't mean that tomorrow you'll be able to go out and get a vaccine.
Okay. So people about, you know, also want to know about should I get an antibody test? And you and I were talking that, you know, maybe hold off a month. Let's see if they're really accurate.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with these antibody tests is that there are a whole bunch of them that suddenly flooded the market, and they're not, overall, they're not great. Some are very good and a lot are not. And yet the FDA was okay with letting a lot of these on the market. They are starting to you know, change that policy. So you really need to be super careful and do your research and, you know, find out, well, what is the rate of false positives? What are the rate of false negatives? You know, some of these tests, like they're fine if you just want to kind of get an overall sense of what's going on in a community. You know, if you use a test on like 1,000 people, even if it gets like a few percent wrong, that's close enough for you to kind of get a rough idea of how many people have been exposed to it overall. But you wouldn't want to go to any one of those 1,000 people and say like, okay, here are your test results, and now you can basically organize your life around this result. Because if you only have like a 90% chance of getting the right answer, that's not great. So I definitely buyer beware, and also bear in mind that nobody really has a clear idea of what it means to have had the virus and have developed antibodies to it. How much protection does that give you? I mean, it's a brand new disease, so nobody can actually tell you. They can give you guesses from other viruses, but you know, you need to bear all these uncertainties in mind.
So what has impressed you about some of the responses from the government, and I don't want to get into politics, but I mean, this obviously could have been handled a lot better, but it could have been handled a lot better worldwide too. You know, other countries. So I was watching Bill Maher and Friday. He said, you know, in 1969 they had Woodstock and there was a pandemic. There was a Hong Kong flu, and he said, but the difference was that people listened to Congress didn't get involved, the president didn't get involved. They just left it to medical experts, saying this is a medical problem. And so all of a sudden, this is not a medical problem. It's, you know, in the United States, like we talk, it's a blue state and a red state problem. People want to get back to work. Which always shocks me because most people say, I can't wait to go on vacation. Hate my job, can't wait to the weekend, but now, you know, but it's obviously money. So do you think what do you think of people saying, we've got to open up?
Well, I mean, the tragedy here is that, at least in the certainly in the United States, that we left ourselves with few options. We got our first confirmed case the same day that South Korea did. South Korea responded with a well thought out strategy that they've been preparing, which involved massive testing, which involved having lots of protective gear for their health workers, and contact tracing, all these things. They started from the very beginning. They didn't wait until they had a whole bunch of confirmed cases to say, oh, maybe we have a problem here that we have to do something about. So by the time that we started seeing a lot of confirmed cases in the United States, your options were very limited because there were so many people who already had the virus that it would be very difficult to trace them. We didn't have good testing in place, so it was really hard to know who had it or not. So really the lockdowns were, the only option. So, and they're brutal. They're terrible. I mean, we're going into something akin to the Great Depression, partly because of them. But, what's the alternative? Letting hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people die? That's not really an option. So, so now we have to figure out a way out of this mess. Just saying like, well, we've had, we haven't had any big increases this week, so let's open up. That's not a strategy. A strategy is, how do we do, say, 1 million tests a day in the United States, as opposed to roughly 300,000 we're doing now? How do we do that? How do we set up a nationwide system of contact tracers? How do we do that? We've barely begun. Just a few states have barely started on that. There's all sorts of opportunity for innovation here. And, if the more innovative and aggressive we are in understanding what's happening, the more we can get out of this lockdown, the more sophisticated we can be in controlling this. So I wrote about looking for this virus in the sewer. Because if you can see where it is in the sewer, you don't have to, you can find out a lot about a community and the prevalence of the virus in a community without having to test every single person there. And so, you might be able to say like, oh, well, it looks like in this one neighborhood, the sewer system is telling us there's a lot of the virus there. So let's focus in on that neighborhood, leave the rest of the city alone and go about its business. So we've really got to be serious about science if we want to get out of this lockdown in a safe way.
So what do you think about, like Microsoft, like Bill Gates has said he's going to come in and help New York set up plans and things like that. What do you think of, so what do you think of, the private sector coming in and helping to solve this,
Well, I think that's, if the private sector has to come in and solve something, I guess that tells us that our government is not doing what it is there for. And, I appreciate the sort of civic spirit that these companies may have, but is it really, do we really want to be putting a company like Microsoft in charge of these sorts of things? And if we are having Google track us to tell us if we're near somebody who's been sick, are we just going to leave it to Google to assure us that they're not going to invade our privacy? Do we leave that up to Google as well? Or do we actually expect our duly elected governments to actually do what governments do and govern and run these things?
So one example I keep thinking of is like smoking legislation that, I worked on the first bill that banned, New York City was the first place to ban smoking in 1988. And it was just partially, not completely, but it got strengthened. But, you know, it got banned in Washington, D.C., but not Alexandria, Virginia. And people in Europe, you know, say to me, I don't get it. Because they say, like in France, when there was a ban on smoking, it was nationwide. In Germany, nationwide. Spain, nationwide. And shutdowns in Europe are done nationwide, as well as Korea. And do you think that would have, you know, that would have been a better system than having each governor decide what to shut down and what date to reopen? Because there's a lot of confusion. I mean, you can drive from, you know, Alabama to Georgia and get a haircut, you know, or a tattoo, or go bowling, you know. So, I mean, you know, and I guess it depends on how good the person is, but you know, the governor of Illinois was on yesterday quite a bit talking about, you know, he's very cautious. And I mean, do you think we should have had, you know, really, I mean, would you prefer a national responsibility? Everyone's going to be tested, everyone's going to be quarantined, or is it, what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, you know, we live in a country where, you know, the Constitution explicitly gives a lot of power to the states, and that is it's a distinctive thing about our country, but it's literally written into our Constitution. So there is a certain amount that the federal government can do, and a certain amount that it is simply not permitted to do. And you know, public health is very much, you know, the infrastructure is very much built around, states have built up public health systems, you know, and so so that doesn't mean that the federal government has no role to play at all. Not at all. I mean, the federal government can come up with overall strategies, can come up with clear guidelines, which states can then rely on. And, you know, the federal government has things like the Defense Production Act that can allow it to come up with a plan like, okay, here's how we're going to make sure not only are we going to require, you know, say 1 million tests a day, but we're going to make sure we have enough stuff, enough ingredients to run the tests. And the federal government, there's clear ways that the federal government can take on these jobs. And, you know, it's just clear that the federal government is not doing much at all in terms of the things that it has to do, even in a country where states have a lot of power.
Okay, so we have questions from the audience that some were submitted in advance, some are submitted in the queue. So if you do have a question, please put it in the Q&A box, not the chat box, because that's just for Carl and I and Joe, just to, you know, if anything's going wrong. So here's a question. This is actually from a friend of mine. I'm curious about the success and timeline of vaccinations and treatments that would be most effective so that we can slowly re-enter small group gatherings in our communities. Also of interest is what is known at this point about mutations of the virus affecting young children. So that's Peggy from Austin, Texas.
So viruses have a very high mutation rate. And that sounds scary, but it's not necessarily scary. I mean, a lot of these mutations either wreck the virus or don't really do much of anything to it one way or the other. Now, a virus like the flu mutates pretty fast, swaps its genes around in interesting ways. So basically every year you got to get a new flu vaccine because the vaccine that you got last year doesn't really do a good job this year. There are big projects going on right now, hoping to make a universal flu vaccine so that those mutations wouldn't matter, but they're still not ready. Fortunately, this coronavirus doesn't seem to be mutating very fast. Basically, you know, researchers have looked at the genetic variation that's growing up as this virus infects more people. And they're pretty confident that, you know, a vaccine will basically cover all the lineages that are emerging of this coronavirus. So that's great. And, you know, this great news is, you know, it's kind of hard to come by, you know, when we've got millions of people around the world already infected with this thing. And millions more to come. So right now, these vaccines are being developed at record speed, but some of them are still in animal trials. Some of them have been in safety trials. We'll see if they start, it could be that some of them will soon go into small efficacy trials. But then a big challenge will be making them because nobody has any immunity to this thing. So ideally, everybody should get a vaccine. And so you're talking about billions of vaccines. So there's going to be the manufacture of this could become the big issue in the next few months.
Okay, so this is from Estrella Burgess, who's a journalist in Mexico. She said, if I get a CV antibody test and I test positive, can I transfer CV to others? And can I get a different mutation of the coronavirus at a later date?
So if you test positive for the antibodies, usually these antibody tests, they're looking for antibodies that kind of build up after a while, after a few weeks after your infection. And by then, if you're walking around and feeling okay, that usually means the virus is pretty much out of the picture. So, you hold on to those antibodies, and the cells that make those antibodies will potentially keep making those antibodies for quite a long time. And it's possible that they give protection, whether that protection is going to last a year or 5 years or the rest of your life, nobody knows. So we will see in terms of that. But so you can't. So if you've recovered from the virus and you don't have any like active viruses in your system, then you're not going to give it to anybody else. So testing positive on an antibody test does not mean that you need to quarantine. Now, if there are these other tests, President Trump, Vice President Pence are getting tested every day to see if they have coronavirus. What's happening there is, they're getting basically this giant swab up their nose, I assume. And those tests are looking for live viruses, for viruses that are replicating an active infection. Can you get reinfected by like a mutant coronavirus in the future? Doubt it. I'll just say that. I mean, we don't know for sure, but the evidence would suggest no. There had been some reinfection studies that were of concern, but it's from South Korea. But now they seem to, it seems to be that maybe those tests were not as depressing as we thought they were. It doesn't look like people are getting reinfected.
All right, so I'm just going to go in order. These are questions people typed in the Q&A box. Do you think governments of all around the world will take this as a lesson to support more scientific research and science communication?
I would like that, but I don't know. I mean, this is not, we are, one of the reasons this pandemic is such a problem is that we weren't terribly well prepared. And even though we had plenty of evidence that something like this was going to happen. I wrote a book called Planet of Viruses. The first edition came out in 2011. And there I was like saying like something, maybe a coronavirus is going to become a real danger to the world at some point in the future. And it wasn't like I was some like prophet or something. I was just saying what experts had been saying for years already. So, we had been through the SARS outbreak in the early 2000s. I don't know why that wasn't a complete wake-up call for everybody, but it wasn't. So maybe it takes a global pandemic, maybe, for people to wake up and say like, well, we don't want to have this to happen again. When we're losing, the world is suffering trillions of dollars in losses now. And we've been putting in a paltry investment into tracking these viruses in the wild, coming up with vaccine strategies and so on, maybe like a couple $100 billion might be worth investing to protect yourself from many trillions of dollars of loss, because we will have another one of these pandemics soon, and soon, or maybe not so soon, but it will happen. And next time it may not be so nice. Coronavirus, like I say, like the vaccine projects are moving along in a very straightforward way. If we get a more cunning virus, we're in big trouble. Bigger trouble.
I was on a call with Dr. Fauci with this other journalist, and he was saying, this is a pretty weak virus. I mean, you wash your hands and it's gone, which is pretty amazing.
So we're not doing very well against a pretty, this is a junior varsity pandemic. It's, this virus is not, there's much worse out there.
Right.
So if we don't learn from this one, what's going to happen next time? What's going to happen next time when you can't wash your hands to get it off? What's going to happen when it has a higher mortality rate? What are we going to do?
And even though it's junior, it's still pretty bad what's happening. So okay, so here's a question from Heidi Angst. I hope I pronounced her name right. Do you have any theories on the genetic mechanism that may make response to COVID-19 so different in different people? Some people die, others people don't even know they had it. I have a 30-year-old relative who was sick for 3 days, got tested, and now he was positive, but that was it, fine in 3 days. As well, besides the underlying conditions. So why?
We can't, the underlying conditions are really, really important. So we can't just sort of brush them aside. There are some clear risk factors, whether it's diabetes, obesity, various heart conditions, hypertension. Those really raise your risks. And so that's certainly part of the issue. It is puzzling then to have people who are, in their 20s or 30s and seem to be in perfectly good health, suddenly like getting sort of terribly sick. There may be some genetic explanation mixed in the mix. So, maybe some people have speculated it has something to do with blood type, because blood type has to do with certain kinds of molecules on the surface of your blood cells. And maybe that viruses are able to interact with some blood cells and not others. We know that's true for I believe norovirus has different effects on people's blood type. One possibility, very simple genetic one. There could be there could be maybe a certain amount of chance, so maybe, our levels of different compounds in our bodies are fluctuating every day. So if you happen to get hit on a day where maybe you have your immune system is at a certain configuration, that might be it. I'm totally speculating there, but I don't think we should rule out just bad luck, honestly, for these wide variations and effects.
Okay, this is from Sen Stark, who's in Belgium. He said, could you please describe the structure of the virus, not just the protein spikes, and exactly which cells have the ACE2 receptors to which it attaches that result in COVID-19? Also,
why don't I take that one? So basically the virus is, think of it as kind of an oily membrane. It's got those spike proteins sticking out. It has some smaller proteins in the membrane, and then there's another protein that's basically wrapping around its genetic material, the RNA molecule inside. Once the virus goes into a cell, it actually gets the cell to make a lot of new proteins that help to basically make more viruses or to sort of keep the cell from doing other things. And then you produce more of these viruses with the genes inside. And in terms of the cells that it infects, they need this, basically, those spike proteins are a key. They need to find the right lock. The lock is a protein called ACE2 that's on the surface of a lot of cells, certain types of cells, I should say. There are certain cells in your nose that have ACE2. There are certain cells in your airway that make ACE2. There are certain cells in your kidneys that make ACE2. So, there are other organs where this virus can get established, and that may be helping to explain why this is not just a respiratory disease. You get people ending up on dialysis, people getting blood clots. I mean, there's a whole range of really worrying symptoms that are emerging.
So here's a question, which is, the kind of question I get every day from people thinking I know more than anybody else, which I don't. And I'm sure I'm waiting the results from an antibody test and hoping if I have them, I can visit my 92-year-old mother in person. Guess I shouldn't, right? I just can't assume that I'm clear of infecting anyone. Is that correct or not?
Wow, that's an important question. I mean, when you think about that, like, when are we going to be able to see our elderly parents or relatives? I just don't think at this point that you want to risk it. I mean, do you trust your antibody test enough to go see your 92-year-old mother? If she gets, this virus, like, her chances of death are very high, much higher than you. And so, I think a wait and see attitude is really called for until we know more about how to take those test results and translate them into what we understand about protection. I don't see the solid evidence yet. And, maybe I'm a kind of conservative that way, when you're talking about an old relative, I think you want to protect them at all costs.
Well, I was told I can't see my kids because, my daughter has a newborn, 2-month-old, but also they're a risk to me because so anyway, so here's a question from William Grassi. Could Carl talk about epidemiological modeling assumptions, changing RO, death rates, real infection rates, including asymptomatics?
Well, it's quite something that, epidemiological models have suddenly become, the subject of cable news debates and are basically every Facebook posts. Suddenly everybody is talking about these things. I mean, I actually, early on, when I had a feeling this was going to be a bad situation, I posted on Twitter and I was like, hey, here's the scene from Contagion where Kate Winslet explains R naught. Maybe I wonder if we'll be talking about R naught a lot. And people were responding like, what's R naught? What are you talking about? And it only took like maybe a month before everybody was like, R naught this, R naught that. And so these epidemiological models, these are, for people who are just getting to know this kind of work, you just bear in mind that this is an area that has been in development for many, many decades. It shares a lot in common with, say, weather forecasting, where you're trying to come up with ranges of predictions based on variables, a lot of different variables, which you don't really know very well. Like, how many people on average does this virus infect? Well, if you've literally never seen this virus before, like, you can't say that. And how many people a virus can infect in one set of circumstances is different than another set of circumstances. And people are being, there's a big backlash now that we're having to epidemiological models, I think, which is being driven by some people who are doing it in bad faith. They're saying, oh, look, these models claim that X number of people were going to die and only this number of people died. Ignoring, of course, that the models themselves change the way we behave. We are part of the model. So we change the model by looking at the model. And so, of course, there are fewer. If you make a model saying like, all right, I'm assuming that people are going to go about their business and spread the virus, how many people are going to get it? And people look at the model and say like, whoa, like I'm not going out to the restaurant anymore. You changed the output. So, there's still a huge amount of work to be done to make these models better. What does it mean that people who are at most risk might be the people who get infected first? Like how does that affect immunity, and then how does that immunity then affect how it spreads in the community? These are all big open questions. Unfortunately, like we got to get some good answers if we want to sensibly make decisions about, for example, how do you reopen schools and colleges? Maybe because I have a kid in high school and a kid in college, this is a question very much on my mind, but I would like us to.
When are you leaving?
Yeah, no, it's been lovely having him here, but they have their lives to get back to, like their lives have been put on ice. So how do we get them back into their lives again safely for them? And also like, I don't want them coming home and getting me sick. So what do we do? These models are really important to coming up with those answers.
Okay, so here's a question, again, about vaccines, but a little more saying, all right, so there's a whole anti-vaccination movement. And do you think that people react the same way to COVID-19 vaccinations as they do for MMRs and things like that? I think people are going to be lining up for this vaccine.
I think so. I mean, certainly like when people were dealing with polio, and they could see the effects of polio, and they saw pictures of children in iron lungs and in wheelchairs, it was very present. And so they would be like, well, how do we deal with this? And just saying like, oh, just live a natural life and you'll be protected. They knew that was not true. Jonas Salk became a real hero because of his work on a polio vaccine. So, unfortunately, vaccines have been so effective that people might say like, well, why are we getting vaccinated for these conditions that I've never seen anyone get? We're just putting ourselves at risk. I have a greater risk from the vaccine than from the disease. Again, forgetting that like by taking the vaccine, we make the disease more rare. They're related. So I certainly hope, like you, that people are lining up to get a safe, effective vaccine. We can't let, you don't want this vaccine to be rushed through the safety testing. We want to make sure it's safe. I guess we'll see. I mean, certainly the anti-vaccination groups have been very active, in some of these protests at state houses. There've been a lot of anti-vaccination people. I think they make up a very small percentage, those really sort of the hardcore anti-vaccination crowd. The problem with something like measles when it comes to the anti-vaccination crowd is that measles is so contagious. It has that R naught that's so high that even if you get, some people who are either against vaccines or hesitating, you can suddenly get a big flare-up of measles. COVID's not that as contagious. So, maybe we don't need 100%. Maybe if some anti-vaccine people don't get vaccinated, we could still produce enough herd immunity to, save the world, get back to life as normal.
I used to work for the Lung Association, and they said, how do we get more people to get a vaccine? And I say, announce there's a shortage of vaccines.
Yeah, sure. No, I mean, there was a big run on the 2009 H1N1 vaccine once it was finally available. I mean,
people were lining up.
Yeah. And I think also like once these measles outbreaks started flaring up recently, you started to see a big uptick of people wanting to get vaccinated.
Yeah. So let's see. So this is from Lisa Ecolano. Says, it seems like the measures that we're using to avoid COVID are not that much different than what we used in the Spanish flu more than 100 years ago. Stay away from sick people, cover your nose and mouth, wash hands. is it surprising that more than a century later, we still don't understand how these respiratory virus droplets aerolize and behave in the air? I'm not surprised, but okay, maybe.
Well,
New
yeah,
virus.
it's again, it's this, it's the people, people now want to say, science, what can you tell us about all of these issues about, say, droplets, and how droplets spread and spread viruses, as if somehow like science is sort of like just humming along, answering all our questions in advance, just on its own. Like we make decisions as a society. Like, so we say, well, are we going to, are we going to fund research? How much funding are we going to put into these things? And how much are we going to support? And this just hasn't been a terribly high priority. In fact, you can find lots of cases where politicians have made fun of basic research. Something looks kind of silly. Why are we bothering with this? And so we just, that's one of the reasons we don't know. I mean, honestly, like how viruses get carried along in droplets from us. This is not, I mean, no offense to the scientists who study this, but we're not talking about the profound mysteries of the universe here. We're not talking about like, dark energy in the cosmos. We're just talking about drops coming out of your mouth.
Right.
We could know these answers pretty well if we wanted to, but up till now we have not really, as a society, wanted to know the answers. There are some people who are doing the research, and they're, they build these sort of, machines to sort of capture sneezes and so on. They know how to study it, but it's always a struggle for them, one year to the next. Are we going to be able to keep this research going? So if you want an answer, support your scientists. It's pretty simple.
So some people are very curious about you. So they want to, someone asked about, so here's a question from Gina Wales. How has covering this topic been different than any other science topic you have written about? Are you encountering more or new obstacles?
Well, yeah. So basically, so at the beginning of this year, I was trying to work on a book about life, like what is life and what does it mean to be alive? So kind of a broad topic. And I was just bopping around between lots of different aspects of life and enjoying myself very much. And I had sort of ratcheted back my work at the Times, but it became pretty clear in February that we were going to be doing a lot of reporting on COVID-19. And at some point I just said to my editor, like, I'm here to help out. And basically, like, I don't know, maybe I've written like 10 articles or more. I lost track. All I'm doing is writing about COVID-19 right now. So, and I've written a lot about viruses in the past, but it's very weird writing about one virus every day, day in, day out, day in, day out, day in, day out, finish one story, start another, do 3 or 4 different stories at the same time, all about the same one kind of virus. So that has been weird, but weirdly intriguing that you can come at just one topic from so many different angles, from the angle of ecology, like where did this virus come from? How did the way we interact with the world's ecosystems leave us in this situation? Or, how do antivirals work? How do viruses work? It is possible to sort of keep a sort of intellectual curiosity going, even when it can be kind of depressing, just actually like seeing the carnage that this virus is creating. I have to say, like, for me, it's kind of like therapy. Like if I was not allowed to write about COVID-19 and all I could do is just take in the news, I would be really, really depressed, as opposed to kind of depressed.
Okay, all right. I was speaking to a friend in Florida who was saying, well, it's been enough time and we got to get back to work. So I said, if someone cuts your leg off and I tell you, well, it's been enough time, start walking. And then he kind of laughed. He's a doctor, so I mean, you do get people not, you know, people getting, like I say, people getting, I've noticed more and more people outside. It's also a little bit warmer, but more people are saying, you know, some of my doctor's offices sent me emails saying they're opening up, you know, 2 days a week, restricted hours, they're cleaning things and stuff. And they say that, you know, like, I mean, people need colonoscopies, you know, I mean, the people, and they've been put off, or mammograms and things like that. And, you know, I mean, President Trump speaks about, you know, I mean, well, but, you know, there's been a rise in alcoholism. Alcohol sales are through the roof. Gun sales are through the roof. Never been better. And they're considered essential services in New York and other states. Domestic abuse. I just know from my daughter's experience, I said, you know, it must be nice to have your family at home. She said, I'd rather have my husband working. I'd rather have my daughter in preschool. I'd rather have my cleaning lady back.
Sure, sure, but people are sort of thinking of that as completely disconnected from the
Oh,
medical situation, and you know, sure, we can go to all sorts of, we can say like, hey, let's all pretend that everything's back to normal. Let's go back to our normal lives. That's great. And then what do we do if in a month we have a bigger spike than before? Like, then that's gonna be even, I mean, you know, no public health person is saying like, oh, I love it like this. They're saying this is bad, but you know, we don't have a lot of options right now. And it's frustrating that we've had, you know, I think as a society, like, you know, we have gone into lockdown to some extent quite voluntarily. We have made sacrifices and have hoped that our government would take that time to create a plan for coming safely back. And if you look at the sort of benchmarks we need, we haven't. That time's been wasted. So just to say like, well, I want to come back anyway, sorry, like, you know, that doesn't make this virus magically go away.
No. I mean, one thing I like to think about is that, okay, so we do get yearly flu vaccines. We'll probably need yearly COVID vaccines as well.
Well, not necessarily. No. The flu, I mean, like I was saying before, the flu does this sort of magic mutation shuffle thing, and which basically means that from year to year, the way we design our flu vaccines, you need to get a new shot. And the reason for that is that our immune system naturally makes antibodies to like the very tip of the spikes that, well, the stalks that come out of the flu virus. And there are people who are working on what they call universal flu vaccine, where basically they're saying like, okay, instead of making an antibody for here, let's make an antibody at the base of the stalk. Turns out you can't mutate the base of the stalk very much or you kill the virus. So, you know, and there are actually clinical trials of these universal flu vaccines. Well, they were going on. They've been sort of slowed down by COVID, but it'd be great to get them moving. And then you might need like just one shot could protect you for many years. So with COVID, it's conceivable that you would get, you know, 1 or 2 shots, you know, over the course of a few months, and then you're good. Maybe you need a booster later on, but it's not. You're not gonna. There's not going to be a sort of a mutational kind of flu season the way there is a COVID. I'm sorry, COVID will not mutate annually in the way that flu mutates annually. It just doesn't. It's a different beast.
So the Spanish flu went away, then came back, and I guess there's a question. I mean, you know, is this going to be around for 2 years? Is this possible?
Well, does anyone see any sign of it actually going away yet? I mean, like it's you know, in order for it to come back, it has to actually go away. It has to at least subside to very low levels. And, you know, aside from, you know, a couple countries, it's really hard to see that. And there certainly are some places in the United States that have, you know, low cases, and that's great for them. But, you know, just wait. Like, I mean, it could, you know, we're still in a phase where it's spreading out to more and more communities, including rural communities, which are, you know, don't have like a good dense medical system to support them when there's trouble. So yeah, I mean, right now we're not, I mean, it has not gone away. Certainly in the United States, I see no evidence of it, quote unquote, going away. And I think anybody who just assumes that in the summer, everyone's going to think about coronavirus as that strange problem we had in the spring is fooling themselves. I think we could very well be, it could very well be as bad or worse right now as it is now in the summer. And then in the fall, it could get even worse than that. And then flu season comes along, and the hospital systems could be in even worse shape.
Well, thanks for cheering me up. Okay.
Well, you're asking why I was kind of pessimistic. This is why. I mean, I'm looking at the numbers and they're not doing what you'd like.
Yeah.
And we're not doing the sort of things we need to do to really have a long-term control of this until the vaccine shows up. I mean, but there are things that we could do as a society and things that our governments could do. It's not magic, but we're not doing them.
All right. So here's a question from Gabriela Ogu in Argentina. How do you deal with the official misleading discourse of the government when the data they're showing looks suspicious?
Well, yeah, we are certainly like, you know, we're trying to do journalism at a time when there are, you know, politicians who are thinking about maybe injecting disinfectants into us, or are just raising the possibility that, you know, China intentionally created this virus, or are, coming up with theories that maybe the death count for COVID is wildly overestimated, when in fact it's probably wildly underestimated. It's tough, but you know, journalists, should never be entirely blindly trusting in their governments anyway, and should be trying to get to the truth however possible. And so, we have situations where, say, Alexis Madrigal at The Atlantic, a journalist, got really frustrated by how bad the government data was on how many people were getting tested. So he created this COVID tracking project, which has been a tremendous success. So much so that this administration now uses that project created by journalists as data for like talking about testing. So we journalists, we can do a lot, and we can even do a lot when politicians are not being forthright with the public. That's what journalists are good for. Although it is awfully frustrating that the government itself is not just doing the COVID tracking project itself, Make Alexis Madrigal Secretary of COVID testing. I don't know, like why is it that they are still relying on journalists to do this stuff?
So you got a
Ridiculous.
little Twitter war with our president. You want to talk about that?
I didn't get into a war. All that happened was that I wrote an article saying that, talking about how this virus arose. This virus arose from bats in China. It spilled over in China, and then from China, it went to different countries. And some scientists in New York were saying, like, okay, where did how did the virus get to New York? And so they looked at the genomes of viruses in New York, and they said, well, it looks like most of these came from people traveling from Europe, not from China. The reason being that it spread from China to various other countries, and then from those countries came to the United States. People claims, including our president, that I was somehow hiding China's role in the story, when it's like literally just, it's there in the article, if anyone would bother to read the article. So yeah, so I took that opportunity to just like kind of lay out the basics of my article in like 7 tweets, and suggest if anyone actually really want to understand the science, they could read my article and then look at the primary literature that I was talking about. It was, yeah, not what I had expected when I got into science journalism.
Okay.
But these are weird times.
So, so Dr. Fauci was saying that he thinks that this will change people's habits forever. They said, like, he said, how come during the flu season people were not, I go to grocery store and you have to stand 6 feet apart, talk to a person. And so in a bad flu season, and there are bad flu seasons,
Yeah.
people kill 30,000 people a year or more, and that's just the, US and worldwide. He said, do you think our habits are going to change because of this? Are people going to be washing their hands more often?
I would sure hope so. I mean, I've certainly changed my habits. I mean, I was pretty good about washing my hands, but 20 seconds washing your hands, I mean, that's a long time. Not touching your face, like not like, oh, is there something in my eye? Like, that's like a really hard thing to do. And when you start taking it seriously, then that can potentially change your behavior. But I don't know. I mean, just the other day, I have been, here at home. This is where I work, and I've been very sort of insulated here. But the other day, I went into a store to do a little bit of shopping, and somebody was there just waiting for an order. He had a mask on, and he's sort of wandering around the store, and like comes up to me and starts saying like, I wonder where they get their vegetables from that they're selling here. They don't usually sell vegetables here. And he's walking towards me, and like that would be a perfectly nice, civil, small town interaction, but not in a pandemic. And so I felt terrible being like 6 feet. But he couldn't shake those habits. So yeah, I think this could be something like with smoking that you were talking about. Like, this is a place where public health messaging could really do some good to get people to say like, even when we get COVID under control, like, until we get the flu really under control, like if you don't want to get the bad case of the flu, these are the kinds of things you need to be thinking about.
So I have a friend, Texas has not been hard hit, and they don't really, they're not doing anything magical, but she's a nurse who said the beds are underutilized. So, I mean, even if people aren't getting tested, which people says that explains it, if people got sick, they end up in hospitals, and that's not happening in some places. And so there are going to be regional differences. And some people say, well, it's because New York City has subways. But I said, well, there are a lot of states that have really bad cases where they don't have subways. So do you have any explanation as to why some states are getting hit harder, even though they're not doing anything different?
This is a giant, pretty much uncontrolled experiment. and because states are responding in different ways, there's so many variables to track. I think it will be hard to really like pin that down, but and it'll take a while to get some of these answers. And again, this unplanned experiment is far from over. So states that maybe in March might have said like, hey, looks like we're getting off pretty easy, suddenly started to see a lot of cases. And if you look at your cases and only see like, we only have quote unquote 1,000 cases here. Well, if you got exponential growth, 1,000 cases have become 10,000 cases, can become 100,000 cases pretty quickly. So, then you have to be looking more closely, like, well, what's the curve? What is really going on? Again, part of this uncontrolled experiment, we're going to see what happens in the month to come when states like Texas and Georgia loosen up a lot of their policies, and we'll see, do the states that have gotten lucky so far, do they stay lucky, or do they suddenly deal with new surges? Because if you've got thousands and thousands of people walking around with the virus, they're going to give it to people. It's really easy. I mean, look at South Korea. South Korea, drove their epidemic down to such tiny numbers. It was amazing. And then you had one person who was infected and, spent a series of nights going to various nightclubs. And now they're having to track down thousands of people to figure out who he exposed, and they've been finding dozens of people who are infected, probably from this one person. So one person over the course of a few nights in big crowds can just totally undo months of hard work. So so anyone who just sort of says like, "Oh, it looks like we've beaten this," is just fooling themselves.
All right, I'll do one more question, and but I'm very happy to see nobody's left, so it's nice. Is it too late to beat the COVID-19 virus? There is an exponential problem that public health may not be able to grow enough to really contain it, i.e. natural selection taking its course. Is it already too late? So basically, are we doomed?
No, we're not doomed. Well, there are different levels of doom in my book. I mean, I write a lot about, when I'm not writing about COVID-19, I write a lot about evolution, and there's sort of extinction level doom, that's where your species goes away. COVID-19 will not make our species go away. COVID-19 has already, killed a lot of people, could potentially kill a lot of more people, could also leave many more people with lifelong problems, with their kidneys and other organs. I mean, this is in that respect, it is a serious issue. So the hope is that we will be able to crush this with the vaccine. That's the big hope. And I don't think we'll be able to eradicate it like smallpox, but I think it will become, in my happy moods, I think that we will get worldwide distribution of the vaccine, and it will become a pretty rare feature of the viral world. I mean, there's still a lot of other viruses to contend with. HIV kills hundreds of thousands of people a year still. So, I'm not saying that once we manage COVID-19, then all is well. But hopefully we can, I do think that we will recover, but it might take, it'll take longer than people want.
So do you foresee more pandemics in the future? Yes. Okay. Like what? We don't know. Okay.
COVID 32. I mean, yeah, I mean, so, and the reason so all this stuff about conspiracy thinking that someone made this virus, or someone sort of, that the only explanation is that it had to be accidentally released from a lab, somehow is rather frustrating to me, because it distracts from the basic fact that just coronaviruses, there are lots of different viruses, but let's just take coronaviruses. There are many coronaviruses. Several of them are known to infect humans, but mammals get lots of other coronaviruses, and these coronaviruses, they can spill over, and we don't have a good angle on how many coronaviruses there are in the wild. We need to, because this is the third coronavirus that has spilled over in the last 20 years. We had SARS, we had MERS, now we got this one, and there are a lot more out there. So just with coronaviruses, yeah, get ready for COVID 32. So what are we going to do to be ready next time? Oh, looks like we may have lost David. Well, maybe I should thank you all for listening and watching. David was warning us that he's been having some Wi-Fi problems, and so yeah, we've been Joe Bonner has been silently managing things for us, and so Joe, do you think we should just wrap it up, or?
Yeah. That sounds great, Carl. Thanks so much for being here with us today.
Sure. Well, I would like to thank David for asking all those questions, and I'm glad we were able to make it so far. And I'm sorry that I was so cranky. It's sort of it's a hazard of writing about COVID every day and seeing solutions that are not being used. So there you go. But it's reason for hope.
Exactly. Well, thank you again, Carl.
Okay.
Thanks everyone for watching.
All right. Take care, everyone.